Happy to introduce Kevin Hancock for our opening keynote presentation, Power Shift, Broadening the Mission of Work in the 21st Century. I've known Kevin since my early years in the industry, back in the 1990s when he was chair of LBM. Kevin's an astute business person and a genuinely good human being. Both of those traits were on display when he gave a powerful opening keynote talk that set the tone for LBM Strategies 2018 in Frisco, Texas. He'd just written his award-winning first book, Not for Sale, Finding Center in the Land of Crazy Horse. It's an excellent book, and if you haven't read it, read it. When I learned that he'd written a follow-up, I immediately asked if he'd consider sharing the lessons of his new book, The Seventh Power, in a keynote address at LBM Strategies 2020. I was very happy when he gave the right answer, which was yes. Thanks to the folks at ECI Spruce, there's an autographed copy of Kevin's new book in your welcome box. Now about his talk. Across America, 140 million people work, but only 1 in 3 will describe that experience as meaningful or engaging. Globally, engagement at work falls to less than 20%. Why? Kevin Hancock believes it's because people at work don't feel authentically trusted, respected, valued, and heard. This keynote explores a new leadership model designed to disperse power, share leadership, and strengthen the voices of others. The new pathway to corporate excellence and social progress requires a fresh focus on the employee experience. Work in the 21st century needs to be more than just an economic exercise. It needs to feed the souls of the people who do it. Kevin, it's all you.
Rick, thank you so much. And hello, everybody. It's really an honor to be with you. And I'm going to start today by saying something that I don't believe has ever been said before in the history of national business conferences. And that is this. Hello, I'm coming to you live from Casco, Maine. If you could see where I am right now in a town that has one stoplight that only blinks, to think that I could be a part of a national conference from here is pretty cool, which brings me to one of the key thoughts I want to talk about today, which is we each have a unique view. Now, that's a pretty obvious point, but I think in the world we live in today, it's a super important one to keep front of mind. The view you have, the view I have, are never to be repeated. No one else is ever going to see the world quite the way you do because of your unique story, your life's story. So this is the sawmill, our sawmill in Casco, and if you look across the street to the building on the right, I'm coming to you from the upper right-hand corner of that building. So like you, I assume I've been coming to work along with our entire team every day since COVID started. And I keep reminding myself what a unique experience that is, because that's not been most Americans' experience. But as I like to tell people, we haven't yet figured out how to make lumber from our couch in sweatpants. That our work, the work that our industry does, is work you have to be there to do, whether it's manufacturing or logistics. And our company, all 550 members of our team, have now worked on site over 700,000 hours since COVID started. And what a mixed experience it's been, right? On the one hand, I would say it's definitely brought us as a company closer together. And yet, on the other hand, it's super important to keep recognizing how consuming and draining living with COVID can be in terms of trying to hold a family and a life together. I do think there's been a lot of learning that's come from this experience and a lot of insight. And the big one I'm taking away is pre-COVID, we had a lot of wasted motion in our work at Hancock Lumber. When the virus hit and we realized we were going to be able to keep working, we immediately said, well, let's just focus on essential activity. And it was amazing how much activity we cut out, how much travel we were able to do without, and how much motion we reduced, none of which, in my view, had a negative impact on our ability to manage or lead the business. I just went over this morning and gassed up my car, and it felt like a bit of a weird event, something I was doing every 2 or 3 days, I'm now doing every 2 or 3 weeks. To the topic at hand today, I want to thank Rick and LBM Journal for sharing with all of you a copy of my book, my latest book, The Seventh Power. It was particularly meaningful to be able to share it with people within our shared industry. And I want to start right off the bat by answering one of the most common questions I get, which is, what's the seventh power? The seventh power is the individual human spirit. At its essence, it's a very simple concept. And an example of the seventh power is you today participating in this conference. It's you taking the time to work on you, to serve yourself, to strengthen yourself, to gain knowledge, to give yourselves time to think. The seventh power is the individual human spirit, and the subject today is leadership models that are centered on honoring and valuing that seventh power. So this would be a leadership model that disperses power, that shares leadership broadly, that honors the individual human spirit. Its enemy would be bureaucracy. It would be that traditional top-down command and control, power to the center approach to leadership, where a few make the decisions for the many, where a few become the voice of the many. Now, I first learned about this phrase, the seventh power, from my time on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation out in South Dakota. The seventh power is represented in the Sioux medicine wheel, right at the very center of the wheel. That wheel around the outside honors the 6 great external powers, represented by the west, north, east, south, sky, and earth. But at the center of the wheel, those at Pine Ridge who still know what they talk about as the old ways know that a 7th power exists, and that's the individual human spirit. And I believe, to the subject of this talk today, that there is on this planet, across the globe, a power shift playing out. I believe we're transitioning, that humanity is transitioning from a world order that has long been institutionally centric to one that is individually centric. For centuries, the empire has come first, and therefore, for centuries, individuals have been indoctrinated into the tradition of followership and sacrifice before the throne. But I believe we're entering, in the 21st century, a new age. And I think it's really important to stop and think about the characteristics that are driving and defining that epic. And I think you could summarize those characteristics by saying we're entering an age of dispersed power, both literally, intellectually, or information-wise, and spiritually. Take the way power itself is increasingly being generated. We're transitioning from large centralized power producing plants to localized solar, wind, and other approaches to generating power, where one day in this century, we'll all be power generators. We'll all be producing power. And that's really representative of what I want to talk about today, which is the power of the individual human spirit and creating companies and management structures that really unleash or disperse that power. So the shift might be defined simply this way. The established leadership model, which has held sway for centuries, has been about power to the center. The new leadership model, which I think when you stop and look around at the world, you'll see is manifesting everywhere, is really more about power to the individual. And if we listen, I think we can hear the cry. I think it's important for starters to recognize that when it comes to work and experience at work, not everybody sees what we might see as managers, leaders, owners, executives of our companies. Not everybody sees what we see. And that's because not everybody has experienced what we've experienced. Take this statistic. When I saw it the other day, it stopped me in my tracks. This is pre-COVID. Every 30 days in America, 2.5 to 3.5 million workers quit. Every 30 days, times 12, annualized. Think about the churn there. Think about the economic waste there. But more importantly, think about the human or social message in that kind of upheaval and disruption. The Edelman Trust Barometer produces some very interesting data. That survey asked a lot of Americans some really simple questions, and here are some of the answers that to me are quite alarming. When asked, does the system work for me? Only 18% of Americans surveyed will say, yes, it does. Conversely, when asked, is the system failing you? 48% of Americans will say, yes, it is, while 34% of Americans are on the fence, unsure. When asked how one feels about the following statement, capitalism as it exists today does more harm than good in the world, over half of Americans surveyed will agree with that statement. What this makes me think about is, are we listening? That has led me to think about a really simple but important idea, which is rethinking the highest mission of work in the 21st century. From what I can tell, most companies get whatever it is that they prioritize, whatever it is they focus on. So a huge question for any company is, what are we going to prioritize? What are we going to focus on? And what's caught my interest in this question and passion is simply this: the idea of prioritizing or using the place of work primarily as a conduit to advance humanity as a whole, by creating what I've come to think about as an employee-centric company, where the first focus of the organization is the experience of the people who work there. And embedded in that thought or statement is this belief: how does humanity advance? I believe it advances one human at a time. That humanity advances one human at a time. Let's take a even closer look at both the opportunity and the problem. Again, pre-pandemic, across America, 160 million people work. But only a third of them, according to Gallup, will describe that experience as engaging or meaningful beyond a paycheck. Globally, the data gets even worse. Globally, about 2 billion people work, and less than 2 in 10 will describe that experience as engaging. As a CEO, but more importantly as a human, I find this super unfortunate, socially and economically wasteful, and unnecessary. Why is the engagement so low? I believe the answer is simple. I believe it's because people don't feel authentically heard as they are, where they are at work. More importantly, I do believe that in the 21st century, work should be more than just an economic exercise. I think work should be meaningful for the people who do it. But for that to be the case, the place of work has got to change. And for the place of work to change, the leaders who are leading the place of work are going to have to create that change with intention. What kind of change? Well, I've come to believe the answer, as it turns out, actually surrounds us. It's woven into the very fabric, if you will, of nature itself. And here's a quick story about how I came to see that. For the first chapter in my book, which you have a copy of, I was doing some work on the Navajo reservation at an amazing charter school called the Star School, which stands for Service to All Relations, in the high desert east of Flagstaff. That night, I went for a walk at sunset alone, and I was thinking about the future of leadership when these 5 words literally just kind of plopped into my head. And those words were as follows: in nature, power is dispersed. In nature, power is dispersed. I stopped, surveyed the scene, and you might have gotten a chuckle out of this had you been watching, began asking out loud a series of rhetorical questions about leadership to the desert itself. My query went something like this: where is the capital of this desert? Where's its headquarters? Where is its corporate governing center? Where's the CEO? Where are the managers? Where are all the supervisors? I turned to a cluster of cactus and said, which one of you, cactus, is in charge of all the others? The answer to every question was abundantly clear. The leadership power of nature is scattered and diffused. It lives in all of nature's parts and pieces, both great and small, both seen and unseen. And here's the connection. Humans who are a part of nature, not above it, ultimately aspire to organize in this same way. To bring this back to something a bit more tangible and specific, I've thought a lot about and ponder in the book that you have a copy of this question. What separates one company, clan, or country from another? In any industry, we've all seen it ourselves. At the same moment in time, some companies will thrive while others are struggling to survive. So what makes the difference? Well, I used to think, and I need to explain this, that it was people. Back in 1991, when I started working at Hancock Lumber Company, we all had sweatshirts and t-shirts that said, "Our people make the difference." And as much as I love people and love those shirts, I don't actually believe that's quite true anymore. I think it's close, but not quite true. I've come to believe that culture makes the difference because great people are actually everywhere. I think that the planet is filled with amazing people. And whether or not they're able to soar is often determined by the culture that they are immersed in, that the leaders have imposed or created for their community. The famous business writer Peter Drucker once said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I really have come to believe that this is true. And I think that history plays this out. Let's take a couple quick examples. Let's think about Germany at the end of World War II. So when that war ended, that country was divided between a West Germany and an East Germany. The Western country was affiliated with Western Europe, the United Kingdom, the United States. The eastern side of that country became a part of the Iron Curtain and the Soviet Empire. West Germany went on to become one of the leading economic, social, cultural engines on earth, while East Germany hung on behind barbed wire and machine gun turrets and guard dogs until it collapsed under its own weight. But does anyone really think that that was because all the quote unquote best Germans ended up on one side of that arbitrary line, and the, I don't even know how you'd say it, less best Germans ended up on the other? Of course not. Germany was then and is today filled with amazing people. It was the culture on either side of that line that made the difference. We see the same thing today in Korea. The South Korean economy is over 40 times larger than the North Korean economy, but it's not because on the random day that random line was drawn, all the best Koreans ended up south of it. Korea was and is filled with amazing people. Culture makes the difference. And specifically, what am I talking about in terms of culture? I'm talking about a culture that either disperses power or centralizes it, that either shares leadership broadly or shares it narrowly, and that either strengthens the voices of others or is a place where the few speak for the many. I have a friend by the name of Jose Miguel Sokoloff who once said to me, we all adhere to a belief system. Otherwise, we don't have a strategy for dealing with the world. And this is the confession or the explanation behind my belief system. It's rooted in 4 dates: 1848, 2010, 2012, and 2020. 1848, that's the year our company, Hancock Lumber, began doing business, and I'm part of the 6th generation of my family to have the opportunity to work for the company and to serve the company as its CEO. And that's been an amazing blessing, and at times an amazing challenge and a really heavy weight to carry. In 2010, at the peak of the housing and mortgage market collapse, I began to have trouble speaking, something I'd always done a lot of and always taken for granted. When I went to talk, all the muscles in my throat would spasm and contract, and I got to the point where people could barely hear me, and it was a huge chore to push out even a few short sentences. Suddenly, I had to figure out how I was going to help lead without really being able to use my voice. When it's hard to talk, you develop strategies for doing less of it. And mine was to answer a question with a question, thereby putting the conversation right back on the other person. So someone would come up to me at work with a question or a problem, and to protect my voice, I started saying things like, well, that is a good question. What do you think we should do about it? And after that exchange, across months and hundreds of times with hundreds of different people, something really struck me, and that was this: people actually already knew what to do. It turned out they didn't actually need a top-down directive from me to begin with. They already knew what to do. They knew their part of the company better than I knew it. All they actually needed was a safe culture upon which they could trust and follow their own true voice. 2012. In 2012, somewhat serendipitously, I began traveling from Maine periodically out to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in the southwest corner of South Dakota. It's a place I've now been over 20 times. Pine Ridge is the largest, poorest, most remote, most historic, and traditionally disenfranchised of all the Sioux reservations on the northern plains. Here is the connection. At Pine Ridge, I met an entire community that felt as if a piece of its voice had been taken or stolen. Out of those 2 events, I ended up having 5 personal learnings, personal truths. First, from my own voice condition, I actually knew what it was like to not feel fully heard, because all the time, every day, for years, I couldn't say everything I wanted to say. At Pine Ridge, I really became aware of the fact that there are lots of ways for humans to lose a piece of their voice in this world. Putting the first 2 thoughts together, I began to ponder the unanswerable question: what's the meaning or very purpose of a human life on Earth? And in this context, I said to myself, well, perhaps it's to self-actualize. Perhaps the one thing every human has in common is we're all just here doing the best we can, trying to find our own true voice, to know it, to live it, to love it, to trust it and to gift it, if you will, to the collective consciousness of humanity. But then I started thinking more about the history of leadership. And while human history has had some amazing leaders, it's also had quite a few not so amazing leaders or self-centered leaders. And I concluded that across time, on average, leaders of human organizations had probably historically done more to limit or restrict the voices of others than to liberate and free them. And that's when it hit me that, well, perhaps the partial loss of my own voice, which I'd only previously thought of as a liability, was actually a gift or a blessing or an invitation to lead differently in a way that strengthened the voices of others. And because I was fortunate enough to be the CEO of a company, I had an opportunity to not just think about this type of change, but to work on it, which has been my mission for the last 10 years. So that's what brought me to this idea of creating an employee-centric company. In the traditional model, while it's always a balance, in the traditional model, the employee primarily exists to serve the company. In the new model, I had in mind the company would primarily exist to serve the employees. And while I believed and have found that this would actually improve the performance of the company, that new and improved corporate performance was now the outcome of a higher calling, which was helping to give everyone a voice, helping everyone to feel heard. So then I started thinking about, and we started talking about as a leadership team, how to go about doing this. And I concluded somewhat surprisingly, that it actually wouldn't be very complicated to flip this script and to make this change. I concluded it could be done with 4 simple changes. We needed a new mission. We needed a new metric to measure that mission. We needed a new set of decision-making systems, and we needed a new shared definition of leadership. So let's start with the mission. The new mission is this: the primary purpose of the company is to add value to the lives of the people who work here in more than just economic ways. Now that takes on some long-standing assumptions. I remember a few years ago standing up in front of a room full of our biggest contractor customers and saying, you know that old saying, the customer comes first? Well, I don't actually believe that's true anymore. I was sweating when I said it. The back of my shirt was soaked. I was so nervous to say it out loud, but I went on to explain myself. I said, here's what I do believe. I believe the people who are going to take care of the customer should come first. And that if a company were able to create a world-class experience for the employees, those employees would in turn create a world-class experience for the customer and show exceptional care for their company. So now, to borrow a piece of Maine slang, what I like to say is the customer comes a wicked close second. We are super into our customers and they're very important to us, but they don't quite come first. The people who are going to take care of them come first. So that gave us a new mission, but how are we going to measure it? In the old model where the company came first, we are buried with metrics to measure that. But how are we going to measure how we're doing putting the employee first? As a primary metric, to get at that question, we began participating in the Best Places to Work survey, which is a national program, very inexpensive, but very good. And essentially what happens every year is every employee in the company goes online and answers about 90 questions about their work experience. And this produces a rich trove of data, including an engagement score, that then gives us the tools to start really digging into the employee experience as defined by the employees themselves. With respect to that engagement score, we then simply asked our managers to make that engagement score, along with safety, their top work priority. If you picture a corporate flywheel of success with employees, customers, vendors, suppliers, community, stockholders, everybody, the idea was simple. Let's put that flywheel in motion at the point of the employee experience, a place we can focus and get our head around. In order to make that work, we then needed a new set of decision-making processes that were really focused on making the voice of the employee stronger. So we take surveys like the one I described, we get a pile of data, we analyze the data, it produces opportunities, we show those opportunities or those questions to employee groups in huddle, say, and we ask them how to make it better. This is too simple to be worthy of presenting on a national stage. And they tell us how to make it better. And then we go do what they told us would make it better, typically with them leading the initiatives. I call this process the answers to the test. It only requires one ingredient, and that is the culture of the company is safe for people that say what they actually think, which requires learning to think differently about listening. And the idea that listening is for understanding, not judgment, and that there aren't right answers. There's only honest perspective. It's really about creating a safe culture where everyone can say what they think. And then finally, to put this all in action, we really needed everyone to buy into a new shared definition of leadership. If you were a manager or a supervisor, you needed to understand that leadership was something to be dispersed, not collected. And if you were part of the overall frontline employee group, you needed to buy into the idea that leadership was something to be accepted, taken on, not spectated or rejected. The simple idea was, how about if everybody leads? So how'd that go? I am a little reluctant to even share this part because I want to really emphasize none of it's about Hancock lumber. It's about pursuit of this idea of dispersed power. So we just became a best place to work in Maine for the 7th year in a row, and our engagement score is an 88. So in a national average of 33, nearly 9 out of 10 people who work at Hancock Lumber will describe themselves as engaged. And across the decade, our performance really took off on the heels of that engagement. I show you this slide for this reason. A lot of people will say to me when they listen to this talk, well, that all sounds great, Kevin, to give everybody a voice and let them be who they want to be and do who they want to do what they want to do. But doesn't that produce chaos and anarchy and a lack of discipline? Well, it hasn't here, I guess is all I would say. What we've experienced is just the opposite. And our safety director, Greg Speed, for me, summarized why the best when he said people are more apt to support that which they help create. Our accuracy, our commitment to best practices, our discipline all have taken off during the period where we focused on giving everybody a voice. The one chart I would line I'd really like to show you here is the bottom one in green, titled Journeys. So this is counting a journey as every time a delivery truck leaves a Hancock lumber yard. In 2012, we made 16,707 journeys. In 2018, with sales that had more than doubled since 2012, we made fewer journeys. Our productivity just really took off when we made the voice of the employee a priority. And then I got a hunch looking at how we've done that something super special might have happened. So I actually went back through all our records from the beginning, and we ended up on a profit basis in 9 years, outperforming the entire company history from 1848 to 2010. And sharing that again, just as testament to what happens to a company when it doesn't make itself the top priority. So in closing, I want to just share a few thoughts. First is the importance of thinking differently about winning. I grew up playing sports in high school and college, and so I totally understood that in order for my basketball team to win, another basketball team had to lose. There was always an equal number of wins and losses. And that's really the definition of winning we all grew up with. But in the 21st century, in a world where everyone and everything is connected, I think a new definition of winning is required. And I don't believe that winning in the 21st century is winning unless everybody's winning. This is a picture I took one day on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, which of course we won the West. But if we won the West, and there are communities in the West, native communities, that today are the poorest places in America, is that really winning? Is that the kind of winning that we want to be a part of? Which also brings me to this point. I think in the 21st century, staying in your lane is really poor advice. When I came into the industry, that's kind of what I had been taught. You get into the lumber business, put all your energy into the lumber business, and don't look up. And while certainly we've got to be experts at our craft and put a lot of care into the small details of what we're doing, I think work's got a broader mission. And I think that it's critical for us as leaders to get out of our lane, to create a more connected world, and to work towards a planet where capitalism is one of the primary reasons why everybody's winning. All of this for me is in pursuit of the potential of a single question. What if everybody on Earth felt trusted, respected, valued, and heard? What might change? I actually think everything might change. And where might this change be sparked or occur? I believe the place of work is actually the best place for this change to be sparked or occur. Why? Because humanity advances one person at a time, and because so many adults work. Work has got to be the place where adults can self-actualize, can come into their own true voice, and can feel trusted, respected, valued, and heard. I think there are there's a process to creating change. It starts within ourselves. It then manifests in how we impact those right beside us. And then it can ripple into the world beyond us. And so I don't think it's an exaggeration to believe that a lumber company or a lumber industry can actually trigger a social movement that can change the world, that's built on the possibility of a single question: what if everybody felt trusted, respected, valued, and heard, and is in pursuit of freeing the seventh power that lives within us all? So I'm really happy to have had this opportunity to share these thoughts with you. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening and thinking with me. And with what time we might have left, I'd be more than happy to listen to you or talk about any questions or thoughts you have. But most importantly, well, as they say at Pine Ridge, we'll peel a tonka, which means big thanks.